Good evening and welcome to First Baptist Church Azle Wednesday night Bible study. We're sure glad to have you tonight. You're looking really good sitting out there in the seats. Start out with singing some praise songs and we can all stand. These are a little slower than usual. Sometimes you can, feel the words better if you slow down just a little bit. Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. When my way grows drear, precious Lord, linger near. When my life is almost gone, hear my cry, hear my call, hold my hand lest I fall. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. When darkness appears and the night draws near and the day is past and gone, at the river I stand, guide my feet, hold my hand, take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. Okay. So Wendy, did you know that if you replace potato chips with grapefruit, you can lose 90% of all the joy you have at this stage in life? So, just wonder if you knew that. We're going to have a song. I stand amazed in the presence of Jesus the Nazarene and wonder how he could love me, a sinner condemned, unclean, singing how marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me. He took my sins and my sorrows, he made them his very own. He bore the burden to Calvary and suffered and died alone, singing how marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me. And with ransomed in glory, his face I at last shall see. It will be my joy through the ages to sing of his love for me, singing how marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me, singing how marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me, is my Savior's love for me. Amen. Have a seat.
All right, thank you, Miss Ann. I always enjoy hearing that. Sunday morning we had an interesting thing happen. Only 30 people saw our service online, which is extraordinarily low, and we found out, that we had a good crowd, actually. But we found out what happened was Roxanne did a new song Sunday, and so the algorithms at Facebook flagged it for copyright infringement, even though we had copyright permission to use the song. They flagged it and just shut down the service on the live stream. So I'm thankful for Miss Ann. We don't have to worry about that tonight because everything Miss Ann does, the copyright ran out a century ago. So that's right. So do I. But I have to give her a hard time for that. I don't know if I'm giving Roxanne or Miss Ann a hard time, but just a double bonus there. 1 Samuel chapter 21. Now, tonight's passage is pretty awful. I don't write them, I just report them. It is an interesting time in the life of David, and what happens tonight is, remember how there was Samson, and he was so brave, and he fought 1,000 Philistines, and was seen as a champion. Tonight, we see his antithesis, his opposite, that is shocking, and we'll get to that in a little while. 1 Samuel chapter 21, if you remember, David is destined to become king, already anointed by the prophet Samuel, and Saul has had the hand of God withdrawn from his life and his kingdom, but God has not allowed him to die yet. He's still king. And so there's this awkward interim time where David is destined to be king, but he's not king yet. And I told you last week, I think it's because David, as a young man, isn't quite ready to be king. There are some lessons God wants to teach him so that he can know how to be a king when he takes the throne. And so tonight we continue to see this as Saul goes downhill. He is out to get David. David is on the run. And this is where we take up in chapter 21 tonight. 1 Samuel chapter 21. David went to Nob, to Ahimelech. And my translation says Ahimelech, not Abimelech. So I will call him Ahimelech. The priest, Ahimelech, trembled when he met him and asked, "Why are you alone? Why is no one with you?" Now, Ahimelech is in this area near the tabernacle, and at this point, because David is famous throughout the country, and we're going to see tonight here in a bit, he's famous beyond the country. In other countries, surrounding nations, they've all heard of David and his exploits, particularly killing Goliath and leading as a champion among the Israelites. And he also officially has duties and responsibilities for the king, even though the king is out to get him. And he's also the king's son-in-law. So when Ahimelech, the priest, sees David, what startles him is the fact that David is alone. Now, why is David alone? He's alone because he's on the run. He's running from the king. Now, there's something there that he wants from Ahimelech. We'll see that in a moment. So the priest asks him, "Why are you alone? Why is no one with you?" David answered Ahimelech, the priest, "The king charged me with a certain matter and said to me, 'No one is to know anything about your mission and your instructions. As for my men, I have told them to meet me at a certain place. Now then, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever you can find.'" Is David telling the truth? No, he actually is lying to him. Now, I read one commentary that said, if you interpret the king, the word the king, as God, then he's telling the truth. If the king he's referencing is Saul, then he's lying. And he's lying. That's my interpretation. I think most people's interpretation. He's making up a story so that Ahimelech will not be bothered. And I think there's this idea of deniability later on, which doesn't work, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But apparently he hadn't had anything to eat in a while, so he immediately asked, do you have something to eat? Is the kitchen open? Verse 4, but the priest answered David, I don't have any ordinary bread on hand. However, there is some consecrated bread here, provided the men have kept themselves from women. And David replied, indeed, women have been kept from us, as usual, whenever I set out. The men's things are holy, even omissions that are not holy. How much more so today? So the priest gave him the consecrated bread, since there was no bread there except the bread of the presence that had been removed from before the Lord and replaced by hot bread on the day it was taken. So at least he doesn't get the hot bread, he gets yesterday's bread. By the way, this is all irrelevant, but I'll say it anyway. If you've ever traveled to Europe or Israel, our bread is Mrs. Baird's. You get it, it lasts for 2 weeks. It stays soft for a long time. Europeans haven't gotten that recipe. In Europe, it's really good when it's fresh and hot, but it don't last. The next day, it's like a rock. And it's the same in Israel. It just becomes stone hard. I don't know what it is about it's more hearty, I guess we would say, more dense, tougher, maybe more filling than Mrs. Baird's, but give me Mrs. Baird's bread any old day. So they get the day-old bread. Now, verse 7, now one of Saul's servants was there that day, detained before the Lord. He was, and it's D-O-E-G. I'm going to name him Doug. I'm going to pronounce that Doug. Doeg doesn't sound good to me, so I'm just going to say Doug. He was Doug the Edomite, Saul's head shepherd. So King Saul's got a head shepherd named Doug. David asked of Ahimelech, don't you have a spear or a sword here? I haven't brought my sword or any other weapon because the king's business was urgent. I think David knows the answer to the question. The priest replied, the sword of Goliath, a Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, is here. It's wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you want it, take it. There's no sword here but that one. David said, there is none like it. Give it to me. So I think that's probably why David is there. He has no weapon to protect himself, but he knows of a really good weapon, the sword of Goliath, that he's used before successfully, and so he wants that sword. And the priest does not keep it from him. I mean, David, if anybody's entitled to it, it's David. So David goes to Nob, is what it says at the beginning. It was a priestly town. It was 3 miles south of Gibeah. That's where the tabernacle was located. By the way, the Ark of the Covenant is not in the tabernacle still. The Ark was still at the house of Abinadab in Kiriath Jearim. Because of his friendship with Samuel, David knew he would find refuge and help among the priests there at Nob. And he had a strong personal devotion to the sanctuary of the Lord. The fact that David arrived alone frightened Ahimelech, the high priest, who was a great-grandson of Eli and was also known as Ahijah. He knew David's reputation and position and wondered why he would be traveling without a royal entourage. All right, verse 10. That day, David fled from Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath. Now, Achish, king of Gath. Gath is what kind of a city? Whose city? It's a Philistine city. It was one of the 5 great Philistine cities. But the servants of Achish said to him, isn't this David, the king of the land? Isn't he the one they sing about in their dances? Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. And so he's left Israelite territory. He's now in as we would call it, a foreign country. He's among the enemy, Philistines, the very ones that he had been killing. And Goliath, of course, was a Philistine. So David is kind of awkward. David is there with Goliath's sword on him. And he shows up in a Philistine town. Well, they've heard the rumors about David. He's now infamous. And they say, isn't this the king of the Israelites? Now, is he the king? No, he's destined to be king, but he's not king yet. Saul is the king, which makes you realize that Saul has at least some good reason to be concerned or jealous, because word has gotten out even to the neighboring nations that David's probably the king now. And so they said, isn't this David? The guy from the famous meme, the guy from the famous quote, Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. Verse 12, David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of Achish, king of Gath. Makes you wonder what David was thinking going to Philistines in the first place. If I was going to hide, I'd pick a neutral place. Verse 13, so he pretended, this was his solution, he pretended to be insane in their presence. And while he was in their hands, he acted like a madman, making marks on the doors of the gate and letting saliva run down his beard. So David had a beard, by the way. Did you know that? I just find those little facts interesting. Achish said to his servants, look at the man. He is insane. Why bring him to me? Here's leadership 101 right here. He says, am I so short of madmen that you have to bring this fellow here to carry on like this in front of me? Must this man come into my house? What is he saying? I've got plenty of nuts already. I don't need a foreign nut to come in here. That also tells me that David is a pretty good actor. Now, we're going to find out he's kind of a drama queen in just a minute, but he was convincing as a crazy person. The king, you would think logically, you would think, oh, he's just pretending so that I won't kill him. But apparently David was so convincing that he didn't. Now, what's interesting about this, another little nugget here, while David is there acting all crazy, he has time to write Psalm 34. During this time, while he's here acting like a crazy man, he writes Psalm 34. And so here's the first 7 verses of Psalm 34. It says, a psalm of David when he pretended to be insane before Abimelech, who drove him away, and he left. Now here it says Abimelech. So here's the first 7 verses of the psalm. I will extol the Lord at all times. His praise will always be on my lips. My soul will boast in the Lord. Let the afflicted hear and rejoice. Glorify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together. I sought the Lord, and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. Those who look to him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. This poor man called, and the Lord heard him. He saved him out of all of his troubles. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. And in fact, God did deliver him. Obviously, he doesn't die. So that's 1 Samuel chapter 21. And so tonight's lesson will not be real lengthy, by the way, but chapter 21 obviously sets us up for what is about to take place in chapter 22. And the plot thickens very quickly here. Any questions or comments, though, about chapter 21? You got it? He's on the run. He goes by, gets his sword from the priest, has some bread for a snack, and then he makes his way to the Philistines and ends up acting like a crazy man and writing Psalm 34. All right, 1 Samuel chapter 22, verse 1. David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. When his brothers and his father's household heard about it, they went down to him there. All those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their leader. About 400 men were with him. So David is now developing or growing an army of his own. And this army in its entirety is made up of three groups of people. People who are in distress, people who are in debt, or people who are discontented. Now, I'm assuming, now, for you and me, by the way, if we're in debt enough, we're going to be in distress and discontented. But I think what he's talking about here is those who are politically discontented. They see what is happening with Saul and his leadership, and they've already heard that David is the anointed one, and they have withdrawn their support of Saul, and they want to go with David, which is a smart move because David is anointed, and he's the guy to go with. So he's got 400 men, and he's at a place called the Cave of Adullam. Now, while he's at the cave, he writes another psalm. It's a busy guy. Psalm chapter 57. I'm going to start in verse 4. I'm just going to read 4 verses for you. This is when he's in the cave. I'm in the midst of lions. I lie among ravenous beasts, men whose teeth are spears and arrows, whose tongues are sharp swords. Again, he's a little bit dramatic there. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. They spread a net for my feet. I was bowed down in distress. They dug a pit in my path, but they have fallen into it themselves. My heart is steadfast, O God. My heart is steadfast. I will sing and make music. Awake, my soul. Awake, harp and lyre. I will awaken the dawn. And I find myself wondering if God doesn't allow David to be in these situations. And I'm so thankful because we have all these psalms that he's pouring out in the midst of all this anguish. Maybe the next time you're hurting or you're depressed or you're in debt, as it says, you should write a psalm. Amen. All right. All of David's family joined him, by the way, at this cave, which meant that his brothers at this point also deserted Saul's army and became fugitives like David. They knew that David was God's anointed king, so they linked up with the future of the nation. Many others saw in David the only hope for a successful kingdom, so they came to him as well. Verse 3, from there David went to Mizpah in Moab and said to the king of Moab, would you let my father and mother come and stay with you until I learn what God will do for me? So he left them with the king of Moab, and they stayed with him as long as David was in the stronghold. But the prophet Gad said to David, don't stay in the stronghold, go into the land of Judah. So David left and went to the forest of Hereth. Now, David took care of his parents, and understandably so. Saul was jealous and angry and losing his mind, and I can see how he would have David's parents killed. So he takes care of mom and dad, and then he returned to the cave and then moved his company to a place called the stronghold, or some translations have the word fortress. Many students believe that that was what is today called Masada by the Dead Sea. We don't know, but it's about 35 miles southwest of Adullam. The Hebrew word Masada means fortress or stronghold and can refer to natural hiding places in the wilderness. David did live in different desert strongholds as he tried to protect himself and his friends and outwit Saul and his spies. But the prophet Gad warned David that the wilderness fortress wasn't safe and that he should return to the land of Judah, so he relocated in the forest of Hereth in the vicinity of the cave of Adullam. Hereth means thicket. So there was a small forest near the cave, and so he didn't go back to the cave, he goes to the forest near the cave. Does that make sense? So he's kind of come full circle at this point. Verse 6. Now Saul heard that David and his men had been discovered, and Saul, spear in hand, was seated under the tamarisk tree on the hill at Gibeah, which with all of his officials standing around him. Saul said to them, this is to his officials he's speaking. Saul said to them, listen, men of Benjamin, will the son of Jesse give all of you fields and vineyards? Will he make all of you commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? Is that why you have all conspired against me? No one tells me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. None of you is concerned about me or tells me that my son has incited my servant to lie in wait for me as he does today. Now, this is Saul being a drama queen himself. And he goes to his supporters, he goes to his own officials, and he says, what? You guys seem to be out to get me too. You let him conspire against me and you have done nothing. In fact, he claims here, this is his argument, that David is lying in wait for him. Did you catch that? So that's his argument. Verse 9. But Doeg the Edomite, who was standing with Saul's officials, said, I saw the son of Jesse come to Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, at Nob. Ahimelech inquired of the Lord for him, that's the priest. He also gave him provisions and the sword of Goliath the Philistine. So here is the turncoat. Doeg's presence at the tabernacle, by the way, is a mystery. He was not an Israelite. He was from where? Yeah, his name's Doeg the Edomite, so he's from Edom. And so he's not part of the covenant. And there he is at the tabernacle. It says he was detained before the Lord at the sanctuary. So perhaps he had become a Jewish proselyte and was following the Hebrew faith in order to hold his job. As Saul's chief shepherd, Doeg could easily have become defiled so that he had to bring a sacrifice to the Lord. David knew that Doeg would report to Saul what he had seen at Nob and that this would mean trouble. We find this out later on. David knew when he was there. He looked over and saw Doeg, the Edomite, who probably stood out because he was an Edomite, and thought, this guy, this is Saul's shepherd. I know who this guy is. He's no good. He's going to tell Saul everything that happens here, but he doesn't do anything. He doesn't say anything to Doeg. He didn't say, Doeg, you keep your mouth shut, I'm going to get you. He doesn't say that. Probably should have said that. What he should have done was I know this sounds harsh, but you'll understand in a minute, he should have taken Goliath's sword over there and used it on Doeg immediately. Should have removed his head from his shoulders just like he did Goliath. Verse 11. Then the king sent for the priest Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, and his father's whole family, who were the priests at Nob, and they all came to the king. So he sends for the priests and the priest's entire family, which were all priests. Verse 12, Saul said, listen now, son of Ahitub. Yes, my lord, he answered. Saul said to him, why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, giving him bread and a sword and inquiring of God for him so that he has rebelled against me and lies in wait for me as he does today? Now, at this point, this would be a good point for the priest, Ahimelech, to say, hey, that's not what David told me. David told me he was here, as one of you, and his men, this, that. But he's accusing him. Ahimelech answered the king, who of all your servants is as loyal as David, the king's son-in-law, captain of your bodyguard, and highly respected in your household? Was that day the first time I inquired of God for him? Of course not. Let not the king accuse your servant or any of his father's family, for your servant knows nothing about all this whole affair. So what he does is he says, what's your deal, Saul? David, you do know David's your son-in-law, right? He's part of your family. He's not only your son-in-law, He's one of your greatest soldiers. He's the captain of your bodyguard. He's highly respected in your own household. What are you talking about conspiring with him? I don't even know what you're talking about. He said, besides, I've inquired of the Lord for him many times before. You never said anything before. It wasn't a problem last time. That's a fair argument, is it not? Well, not if you're trying to appease a crazy king. But the king said, you'll surely die, Ahimelech, you and your father's whole family. Well, that sounds bad. Then the king ordered the guards at his side, turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because they too have sided with David. They knew he was fleeing, yet they did not tell me. But the king's officials were not willing to raise a hand to strike the priests of the Lord. Now, that's a smart move. You shouldn't strike the priests of the Lord. And by the way, I'm the priest of the Lord here, so I appreciate that. You shouldn't strike the priests of the Lord. If it stopped right here, we'd be okay. Saul turns to his guys and says, okay, you're my executioners, get him. I want you to kill them all. But you don't do that. You don't kill God's priests. You don't do that, by the way. And so he says, don't. So they said, nah, that's a hard pass. We're not going to do that. But while they were unwilling to kill the priests, they were willing, apparently, to let somebody else do it. Verse 18, the king ordered Doeg, you turn and strike down the priests. So Doeg, the Edomite, turned and struck them down. That day he killed 85 men who wore the linen ephod. Wow, one guy killed 85 men. You would think the 85 guys would have gone, hey, let's tackle him. Verse 19, he also put to the sword, and by the way, it just gets much worse. He also put to the sword Nob, the town of the priests, with its men and women, its children and infants, and its cattle, donkeys, and sheep. One guy goes on a rampage and slaughters an entire town of men, women, and children. He is so bad and so evil, he kills the cattle, the donkeys, and the sheep. Now, who does that? Who kills women and children? Verse 20. But Abiathar, a son of Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, escaped and fled to join David. He told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. Then David said to Abiathar, that day when Doeg the Edomite was there, I knew he would be sure to tell Saul, I'm responsible for the death of your father's whole family. Stay with me. Don't be afraid. The man who is seeking your life is seeking mine also. You will be safe with me. Now, the fact that Doeg was accusing God's anointed king didn't bother him, or that he lied about what the high priest had said and did. Notice when he gave his report to Saul, he could have first of all, he didn't have to say a thing. He could have kept his mouth shut because he knew that the priest didn't know anything about it. He knew that the priest was simply helping David because he thought that David represented the king. But he said nothing. In fact, not only did he not say that, what he did say implicated the priest and his family. So you have to ask the question. I was asking the question myself. I couldn't wait to get another chapter or 2 or 3 or 10 and find and see Doeg get what was coming to him. Yeah? That great battle where David becomes king, and first order of business on his first day is find Doeg. I want to have a talk with Doeg. We're going to get Doeg back. That Doeg's no good. But you know what happens to Doeg? We never hear of him again. That's it. Name never mentioned again in the Bible. We have no idea. Now, there are some rabbinic, what they call rabbinic traditions that there was a curse against him. He got his in the end, and I hope that's true. Whether it's true or not, whether in this life or in the next, Doeg got what was coming to him. But I would really like to have had that chapter, the death of Doeg. It's like the movie without the final scene. I wanted to see Doeg get what was coming to him. Anyway, my torch was lit and I was ready to go, and then it gave me nothing. But, good old David wrote another psalm. He wrote, as a result of Doug, in Doug's honor, he wrote Psalm 52. So turn to Psalm 52 and we'll end with Psalm 52 tonight. Psalm 52, we'll start in verse 1. I think I'm going to do the whole psalm. It's not very long. Psalm 52, verse 1. It says, "For the director of music, a maskil of David, when Doug the Edomite had gone to Saul and told him, David has gone to the house of Ahimelech." So here's his psalm for Doug. "Why do you boast of evil, you mighty man?" I'm assuming that's sarcastic. It sounds sarcastic. "Why do you boast all day long, you who are a disgrace in the eyes of God? Your tongue plots destruction. It's like a sharpened razor, you who practice deceit. You love evil rather than good, falsehood rather than speaking the truth. You love every harmful word, you deceitful tongue. Surely God will bring you down to everlasting ruin. He will snatch you up and tear you from your tent. He will uproot you from the land of the living. The righteous will see and fear. They will laugh at him, saying, Here now is the man who did not make God his stronghold, but trusted in his great wealth and grew strong by destroying others. But I'm like an olive tree, flourishing in the house of God. I trust in God's unfailing love forever and ever. I will praise you forever for what you have done. In your name I will hope, for your name is good. I will praise you in the presence of your saints. Now, I like this approach that David has. He confronts Doug and says, let me tell you, you're going to get yours. God's going to see to that. But he ends the psalm not focused on Doug. He ends the psalm focused on God and his goodness, his greatness, and his provision. He doesn't let Doug get to him. But Doug is, sorry, no good guy, by the way. All right, any comments or questions about chapter 22? All right, we're going to look at our prayer sheet. If you'll grab your prayer sheet, does anybody need a prayer sheet? If you do, just raise your hand. We'll get one to you.